guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Daisy, and if you're not new here, my name is still Daisy. And today we're going to be talking about the complexities of the ancient Spartan world. Now, if you've watched the movie 300, you've probably heard about the Spartans, what their society's like, how they treat women, but a lot of that movie is actually historically inaccurate. A lot of it is based on real source evidence that we found from people writing about it a lot later, but a lot of it is not actually how Spartan society worked, how it functioned. And so today we're going to be talking about the structure of Spartan society, how they treated women, what were the roles of the ephors, and just all of that good stuff that maybe wasn't so accurate in the movie. Now, if you do like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me teach you about ancient Sparta. So if we're going to do this as a kind of pyramid scheme, I shouldn't be doing that on the internet. If we're going to think about this from a pyramid scheme, we're going to think about it from the bottom up. Now, the bottom of Spartan society were the helots. The helots were slaves, serfs, people who were forced into labor by the Spartan people. Now, a really interesting thing about Sparta was that normal Spartians or normal Spartan people didn't have jobs. They weren't warriors as you might expect them to be. They were trained in combat. They were trained to be warriors when the time came. But for the most part, most day to day, they didn't have careers. They didn't have jobs. They had helots to do things for them. Every Spartan in Sparta had a personal person that would follow them around and do their daily chores for them. And, you know, they had blacksmiths, people to make their clothes, people to clean, but they were not Spartan citizens. They did not hold the same rights as the Spartans or the Spartians, the normal Spartan citizens, and they were made to live in Sparta and pick up all of the work that should have been put on the hands of Spartan people. But yes, Spartans definitely did own, keep, and use slaves throughout the existence of Sparta. So yes, they would be considered the lowest in the hierarchy in Sparta. Just up from the helots in the Spartan hierarchical society is something called the perioeci. Now, the perioeci weren't slaves, they weren't helots, they were dwellers of the surrounding territories of the villages of Sparta, and they can be considered artisans and traders, and they did not hold much political right in Sparta. They weren't Spartans, they weren't allowed to vote, but they were still required to do military service and to be involved in the army if needs be. They still did have to pay taxes to Sparta, but they were just people using the land around Sparta or living in the land around Sparta. But for the most part, they were allowed to kind of govern their own small local communities, and they weren't as involved in Spartans' societal hierarchy as you would think. They were not overlooked by the kings. They were still technically a part of Sparta, but they were left to govern themselves. So I would not consider them a part of Sparta, but they were just involved in the territory of Sparta. They obviously didn't have the rights of a Spartan person, but they did not have the duties of a helot. So they were just kind of these middle people. So next up on our tier list, we have the Spartians, the Spartians, the normal Spartan people. They are the men, the women, and the children that are fully Spartan-blooded. They have full Spartan blood, and they are afforded all of the rights that all Spartans are afforded. The right to own property. Even women at this time had a right to their own property, which is a lot of the time why people say that Sparta had treated women very nicely, and a lot of the time why they say Sparta was like a feminist society where women were taught to be strong and women were taught to, you know, be individual and be themselves and not afraid to be strong, when that's not particularly true. I mean, women were afforded rights that other women in ancient Greece at the time couldn't even think of, especially in Athens and places like that, women were not only not allowed in the discourse of politics and making laws, they were actively shunned from those places, and that was not the same in Sparta. I mean, men still ruled, it was still a patriarchal society, but women were allowed to own property, women were allowed to encouraged to participate in sports and exercise. And it's not as if the Spartan men cared particularly for the Spartan women. I'm not saying they didn't, but it wasn't like they were really into women's rights. They just lived under the pretense that a strong woman birthed a strong Spartan man, and the Spartans loved strong men. The reason why they sent away their sons to train is because when it came time for battle, when it came time for war, they wanted them to be well equipped. And even though in everyday life they weren't soldiers, they weren't an army, when they got called upon, they were particularly skilled in a lot of things. Two things I do want to talk about from the movie that is a little bit inaccurate is, firstly, we have no idea how long these boys were sent away for. The movie makes it sound like they were pushed out at age 8 and they had to spend 10 years in the wilderness by themselves. And that's where we get that scene where he kills that gigantic beast. But actually, we don't have any evidence of that. We know that they were sent away to train. We know that they were taught in many skills of combat. One of those in particular was not weapons, the use of weapons. We knew actively that they didn't use weapons when they trained. So when the movie was showing, sword fights and things in that kind of nature, it isn't as accurate. We don't have as much evidence of them actually using weapons in their training. Obviously, we know that their basic armor would have been a shield. They would have had armor. They wouldn't have been topless, which is a crazy thing to think about from the movie. Why on earth would your army only have a robe as protection? That seems like a suicide mission. They did definitely have armor, they definitely had a shield, they definitely had a spear, and they definitely wore protection. They were not topless. And as much as, we can thank Gerard Way for not wearing a top. Gerard Way? When I was a young boy. As much as we can thank Gerard Butler for not wearing a top in the movie, it is not historically accurate. I'm sorry, I know, I'm sorry. But yes, they were trained for the time where they are needed in battle. They think about it as they were standbys. They didn't have a job. They didn't really do much except for train and wait to use those skills. But it wasn't like they were an army. It wasn't like they were all warriors. They just were trained in that particular fashion. And the same can be said when it comes to areas of society. They had a very structured society. They had a very hierarchical society, which we'll get into a little bit. They were also quite diplomatic. I mean, instead of having just one ruler, they had two, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. Right now, we need to move past the Spartans into the people of power within society, and this is where we really see Sparta's diplomacy and how they try and navigate running a society as fairly as possible. Now, talking about diplomacy and how Sparta tried to navigate politics within its 5 villages, they actually had a sort of council. It was called the E4, that would be elected for 1 year, and it would be made up of normal Spartan people. Now, in the movie, they portrayed the E4s as these grotesque, kind of perverted even creatures, not really men, not really monsters, like, at the top of the mountain, those people, they portrayed them in such a strange way in the movie, and it really bugs me because these were just normal men. They were normal men that it was basically jury duty. It was a long form jury duty. They were able to overlook the kings. They were able to have a say in political matters, to give advice on war, to give ideas from other parts. For example, the oracle being at Sparta was very, very strange in the movie because there is no oracle at Sparta. The sensual lady that tells them the the truth from the gods, yeah, that she's not at Sparta. The closest one is at Delphi. And so the E4 would go to Delphi. They would send people to Delphi and they would ask for advice from the oracle there, but they definitely didn't have an oracle in Sparta, and they weren't overlooking her some creepy predators while she was flailing around on a bed. That definitely didn't happen. Definitely wasn't true. So when the movie came out with that, I thought it was very interesting, because I know they were trying to portray Sparta as this like enclosed universe and a representation of Greek society at the time. So they wanted to bring in aspects from the stories, from the writings. They wanted to bring in the ephors. They wanted to bring in an oracle. They wanted Leonidas to, they wanted him to be part of all this, even though a lot of the time he had been dead at this point. But I digress. I just found it really interesting that they brought the oracle in, because that's just, not only is that like historically inaccurate, it's just like, why on earth would the oracle be at the top of a mountain in Sparta with the ephors, who are just normal dudes, just normal guys? And the only like constraints you had to being an ephor was you had to be of Spartan blood, you had to be over the age of 18, and you had to serve it for a year. That's all you had. So yeah, to portray them as these like evil beast monsters was like just very, it was a choice. It was an artistic choice, and I don't know where he got the source material that they were these strange men. But yeah, that's not true. Didn't happen. Now, moving on to the people who probably have the most power in Sparta, except for the kings, and that is the Gerousia. Now, the Gerousia was also shown in the movie. It was these people, and what's really interesting about this is that this man is in it, and I don't know about you guys, but does he look 60 years old? Does he look older than 60? Because that is the requirement to be in the Gerousia. The Gerousia is a group of 28 men that are 60 years old and older, and you can think of them as like the Senate, the group of elders, the men that are the direct overlookers of the king's actions and the king's behavior. And if the ephors were the supervisors of Sparta, looking over, making sure things are being implemented, then the Gerousia are the people making the rules. They have legislative power, they make all the decisions on representation of the king, and they are also the closest thing that you can get in Sparta to being able to question the king, or to being able to change laws, change rules. And they were really important because they were seen as the final say. You had to bring things to the Gerousia, and they made decisions, military decisions, legislative decisions. They were like the ephors' bosses, The ephors could give their opinion. They were kind of a neutral party. They were Switzerland in this society because they were made up of normal men. There was only 5 ephors, and counteracting that with the 28 Gerousia that are all 60-year-old men that are all in favor of the kings. The whole reason for the ephors is because even in ancient Sparta, they could see how the Gerousia could be in some way biased. So the Gerousia are the Senate, and then the House of Representatives. Americans, please tell me if that's right. I am British. I do not know if that language is right, but I'm going to assume it is from what I've read. Now, moving on to the final part of Spartan society, and that is the 2 kings. Now, the 2 kings in Sparta came from 2 families, the Agada family and the Eurypontids family, and their successors, their sons, would pass on the line. And the reason they had to was actually because they wanted to stop kind of tyranny. The thing about Spartan society, and the thing you need to know about Spartan society, is it's so intricate and complex, but everyone has a place, everyone has roles to fill, and it works really well in that sense. I mean, it's not like Athens, and a lot of the writings talk about how other parts of Greece mention and comment on the structure of Spartan society and how it works well. And yes, they did have slaves, they did have a monarchy, there definitely was a hierarchy, but that hierarchy worked really well in ancient Greece at the time. And it's really interesting that there were so many factors to it, but even back then, they were trying to implement parts of diplomacy, they were trying to implement some fairness. And yeah, I think a lot of the movie, a lot of 300 didn't show that structure. They showed the king, Leonidas, if you're watching it for the first time, but they showed him, and then hit the ephors as a strange thing that wasn't really what they are anyway, and the Gerousia, which was completely wrong, because why is this man here and he's like 30? But they tried to implement parts of society that are very accurate, like there were ephors, there were Gerousia, there are things like that. They did leave out some major people, like the slaves that do all of the work in the society. And even when they march out to battle with only the 300 soldiers, it's also not accurate, because in that time, if there were 300 soldiers, there would be just as many people carrying their bags, playing music, watching guard, because all of those men would have had a designated person that was with them 24/7 that did all of their things for them. So when they showed this march out of 300 men by themselves going out to the wilderness, that would not be accurate. Firstly, they were allowed to go, they were told to go by the Gerousia. They can't just go somewhere without the permission. Secondly, the timeline of the movie of the Ghanea, the festival, and they're not allowed to go, and the reason they can't go is because of this, and things like that is just out of this world bonkers. Sparta didn't work like that. Leonidas would not have pretended to go on a walk and gone into battle. He wouldn't have. It was all regulated. It was all given permission by the elders, by the council. It was all given permission by them. He would not have done that. That's just not who he was. That's not how Spartan society worked. And so when they were making it seem like he was going in for justice in a suicide mission, he would not have done that. What do you mean? And the fact he stayed after seeing all the Persian army and seeing that they were outnumbered so much, why would he have stayed? He could have fought them another time. He could have, it makes me so mad, because it's like portraying Spartans to be these like people that just craved for death on the battlefield. And as much as they thought that that was a great honor, as much as the quote, Spartan, either come back with your shield or on it, is definitely a quote from Sparta, definitely a quote, but they were not suicidal people. They were not going on battles for the risk of dying. And in Leonidas's case, it's a little bit different, because, you know, the movie portrayed him as this man that was like completely against the oracle for one, the ephors for another. He definitely wasn't. He was very much well versed in Spartan society, in Spartan politics. He would not have gone behind their back like that without their permission. So when the movie portrayed that, it was a little bit inaccurate. Okay guys, so that was a little deep dive into a simplified, very simplified structure of Spartan society. If you want to see any more videos about Sparta or any more areas in history, then please let me know, because I love making videos like this. I love history. And yes, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!